The most of your experience was always corporately speaking. Was it almost, well, was it design, marketing, business development? What was it closer related to?
When I was at Ralph Lauren,
Yeah,
I was always in design.
right. So your tool belt was always design and product related, but who were you as an entrepreneur when you were starting out? How would you describe it? Were you a curious adventurer? Were you an assertive vision pursuer? Were you more of an artist? What? So it's very clear what your tool belt at the time was, but what about you yourself as a person?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good question again because most of us are just who we are, right? We really don't stop and reflect all the different parts of us, right? So we're in there, we do our thing, and you know, for me, the creative part, the the business part, like it's really all one thing, and it's not one thing for everyone. And I think for me, uh, there's a few people in fashion that have this balance between art and commerce. They're very rare. I'm one of those people. That's why I can be the CEO of R13 and the creative person, because usually it's two very different way of thinking. Do you know what I mean? One is two plus two equals four, and the other one is
Two plus two equals whatever I want.
right, exactly. And it's really that balance between the two of them. And I sort of developed my business sense over the years through protecting my creativity, if you can understand that, because
Mm,
people can really take a creative idea and do very wrong things with it. And what it does is the outcome of that gets put on the idea, but that's a misunderstanding. It's
okay.
there's a whole process. And a very simple uh thing that happens in fashion is you can create a pair of pants, and let's just say that pair of pants is subjectively a great pair of pants. Now, if a buyer buys 10 pieces of that, 20 pieces of that, 100 pieces of that, right? It doesn't do anything to change how good that pants is. But most of the time, if she buys 10, most likely it's going to be a success if she sells 10 out of 10.
Hmm.
But if she bought 100 and she sold 10, now it's a failure. Same amount sold, same pants. The
Mhm.
ownership itself now makes it a failure if you
Hmm.
understand what that is, right? Because how business is measured is like, well, I bought 100, I only sold 10, which is 10%, right? Which is a very bad sell-through, as they say. But if you bought 10 and you sold 10, that's 100% sell-through. Now it's a huge success. And again, I'm going back to what is the same pair of pants and the same amount of units sold. What changes the ownership, for example? And
Hmm.
that's just one of so very early on when someone says like, oh, what that's sold poorly, I start to dig in like all the nuances because I was just a designer, but I'm very protective of what I did. So through really protecting the integrity of what I designed, I began to really understand the business part of it.
I
Um,
see. So protecting the integrity of your creative vision was more about manipulating the environment and the industry as much as you could to always stay true or to allow the product to be in an environment where it could develop and be healthy. And then as you developed the experience of how those two things interconnected, you slowly started taking bigger and bigger risks in that sense.
right. And I don't, I think that example of really the buying part and how it could really corrupt the creative part. Like, I don't want that to be misconstrued as like the business part is the bad guy and the creative part is the good guy. I mean, the thing is in life, yin and yang is really, if you respect yin and yang, then you respect both sides, right? And if you from one side looking at the other, it causes an imbalance. So, when I explained that, it was really at a place when I was in design where I'm looking over to the business side. But eventually, especially now as the owner of R13, it's a balance between both that I have to keep because they're both needed for a successful company.
Hmm.
Though I have to say, I say it all the time, if you describe two company and that is there's art and commerce, right? And if you have a company that is art and then immediately commerce follows a second versus the opposite, commerce is first and then art second, those two companies are very different companies. They're two of the same critical elements, but how it manifests itself is very different. So in R13, now I'm not saying like the other element comes at a distant second. No, they're actually very close. It's just a flip of who's going to lead, right? They're partners, but if one leads, it creates a different thing. And R13, creativity leads first, but of course, the business has to be a strong partner to support it. And
Right.
there's other companies where like it's driven by business people, and it's a very different. They're both very successful. They both can be very successful. They're just
Right.
different companies.
And I'm guessing coming down to the decisions of what type of brand you're going to build at the end of the day is, as you said, just who are you authentically as a leader? And
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Also
interesting.
today, when you look at it, it's, I grew up in, I came to New York in the 80s and 90s. And, I was, I don't know, I was in my early 20s. I'm discovering New York, and, there was a whole punk scene going on there. Uh, that's when the first wave of like the world was discovering Japanese design, like Comme des Garçons, Yoji. It was like a magical sort of time for me because I was young, and when you're fresh, everything is beautiful, right? So when you look at R13, whenever I talk about R13, like at the very root of that is really that time and that place. Of course, I'm also absorbing what's now, right? So self-expression is your entire history of where you are. So I live then and I live now. If I'm in touch, what does it look like? Do you know what I mean? It looks like, so it's a I would say it's an expression of me and my experience. I'm actually reading the book by Rick Rubin. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah, of
He's a,
course.
yeah, yeah. And I'm really obsessed with the book because he's so
Well, he's the perfect example of somebody that has been incredibly successful being almost entirely creatively led, right?
right,
And I
instinctual.
think
Like,
and I think and I think that and I'm the same way, by the way, creatively led first, business second. But I think that there, because as you said, it's so rare to find people that are almost wired this way. The educational are even more limited, right? Because where are you going to learn all these things from? And brands and successful brand owners that I've sit down with are either one or the other, and they have a partner to complement them with. But to find somebody that is both at the same time is very difficult to see, and therefore it's also very difficult to learn. I think Rick Rubin is one of the very few people that are very public and educational on their approach. So, yeah, for sure. I think that.
yeah, yeah, and he's great. And I'm listening to his book, and one of the things he was saying is like, when you're creating something at the moment, it's like an entry in a diary. Do you know what I mean? And I thought that was a great perspective, and it actually also add a perspective because I'm designing collections all the time. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's this perspective as you're creating as if it's there's a lot to go in with it. But I think when you sort of just tweak your perceptions, like, listen, this is my expression of what's happening right now within me. And then tomorrow something else will happen, and tomorrow something else would happen. So you're not certainly when I look at that, I become a little less attached to like, oh my God, is this what I'm doing now? Is it the end all? And no, because we're creative people, we're going to continue to create. And I think it's important to really just be fully present and authentic to the moment, and really to the moment is I think is key, even in my job, like, we're developing product all the time, right? And I'm making decisions all the time. And then, I think I would make a decision uh that was 3 weeks ago, and then 3 weeks later, I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'm not into it anymore. And they're like, oh, Chris, and I'm like, I think I'm saying it's okay. Listen, you know what? It's things change, and you have to allow because in those 3 weeks, a lot of things could happen that influence how you look at things, and
Yeah, how you
you,
create.
yeah, and you just have to be in touch and not with your intuition. You know what I
Of
mean?
course.